So welcome colleagues. How are you? Very glad to have you in this space with us. We have a bit of a dream team uh, here with us today to do our third and final Wednesdays with Wendy, which is a way that we have, at least for my presidential campaign, Wendy for APA. I think it's pretty self-explanatory, and if you're here, you know that. Um, that it's a way for us to share a bit of the platform and the work that I find meaningful and important, and also to introduce folks to me, to my leadership style through this conversation in a way, partly because one of the ways that I'm thinking about that leadership for APA president is really to leverage and amplify the expertise and the voice of our colleagues so that we can advance APA's mission. None of us can do it by ourselves, and there's such diversity and range within our field and in our association that we really do need to call in and pull in our colleagues. The presidential initiative or initiatives that I have, the platform that I have, focus on three things. So we've had Wednesdays with Wendy conversations on 100 Psychologists Rising, which really is the a look at the ways in which psychologists work is far reaching and can have impact beyond clinical and typical settings. Youth mental health, that conversation happened on May 8th. We had experts in conversation around some of the issues that are facing our young people and what we can do as psychologists to ensure that they are included and have a sense of what their wellness and mental health wellness can look like within our organization and how their voices can contribute to that. And today is our third and final conversation, wellness at work. This is a topic that's personally very important to me. Some of you may be familiar with my work and a book that I wrote, Black Women at Work, on refusal and recovery. And so one of the things that's been really important for me is to uplift the perspectives of uh, Black women in my work, and particularly within the context of professional spaces, work and leadership context, and some of the challenges that are faced in that space, but also some of the opportunities. And one of those opportunities, I think, lives in the context of the lessons learned that we can sort of share and make available to many more people, because there are some survival strategies, and I would say thriving strategies that Black women implement that are important. And so I've invited several colleagues to be with me today. Dr. Ailey Caro Pinheiro, Dr. Talia Bragg, Dr. Charmaine Jackman, Dr. Paris John, and Dr. Grace Kim, dear friends and dear colleagues. So pulling them into this conversation and wanting just to give you a sense of who they are before we get started in a few questions that we have. So they have both just very extensive bios. I'll short shrift a bit, but not too much, because I do want you to have a full sense of who you're in space with today. And I'm going to bring Dr. Jackman back into our foray. There she is. All right. So Dr. Ailey Carrero Pinheiro is a formerly undocumented Peruvian immigrant, first generation student, American Psychological Association Minority Fellowship Program Fellow, me too, and an award winning licensed psychologist. She's the founder of Aliana Psychological Training and Consulting Services, LLC, providing dynamic and culturally centered services. She is also the founder of hashtag PsychGradWishlist. If you don't already, please follow them on Instagram and contribute. This is an online mutual aid movement for incoming psychology interns and graduating trainees of color. Her dedication to the present and future of the profession was recognized in December of 2022 when she was awarded an APA Presidential Citation for her commitment to eradicate racial trauma and her leadership in supporting early career psychologists and graduate students. She serves as an elected member of the Executive Committee of APA's Division 56, Trauma Psychology, and as member at large and on the board for the advancement of psychology in the public interest, BAPI, for short, of the American Psychological Association. So she has no shortage of things to do, I'm sure. So we're really glad to have her here with us. Dr. Talia Bragg is a dear friend and colleague and alumni of Fielding Graduate University, where I serve as provost. So I'm really glad to have Dr. Bragg with us and grateful that she said yes.
Oh, okay. Sama phone.
Okay. She is a clinical neuropsychology postdoctoral associate at Boston University Chobanian and Avesdian School of Medicine in the Chronic Traumatic Encephalopathy CTE Center. Did I get that right, Talia?
Good enough.
Good enough. Okay. She completed her doctoral training in clinical psychology at Fielding Graduate University and her pre-doctoral internship at the Center for Multicultural Training and Psychology, CMTP at Boston University, where her clinical foci were providing behavioral and psychotherapeutic interventions and systems care for children and families. Her dissertation examined how childhood and adolescent stress exposure influence the risk for accelerated cognitive aging and poor physical and mental health outcomes in self-identifying Black people. Her postdoctoral research interest in clinical neuropsychology emphasizes abolishing racial disparities in neuropsychology that may harm Black self-identified communities experiencing endemic rates of onset of for Alzheimer's disease and related dementias. She is very accomplished as well. I'll list a few of her accomplishments. She is in 2023, she was awarded the For Mother Early Career Track from Division 35, Section 1 on Black women in psychology. I'm really happy about that. That's one of the awards that, as president, we put into place. She's also the 2023 or member of the 2023-25 cohort for Emerging Scholars Program on the Black men's brain health in partnership with the NFL Alumni Association. And I'll say one more. In 2022, she was awarded the Stuart C. Tony Outstanding Professional Development Program Award by the American Psychological Association. Welcome, Dr. Bragg.
And as of last week, the DEI award winner from Division 40 in APA.
Well, congratulations. Let's just keep racking up the accomplishments. Dr. Charmaine Jackman is an award winning psychologist, author, and leadership coach. She is a leading voice in mental health and workplace well-being and CEO and founder of EnoPsych, a premier resource for impactful and inclusive mental health solutions after 2 bouts of burnout, not one, but 2. So she really is an expert on this topic, and we hope you're in recovery from that or have recovered from that. She decided to make a sustainable change in her life and is deeply invested in helping others thrive in life. She leverages her experiences with burnout and racial trauma to elevate conversations about employee well-being and healthy self-care practices, to inspire others to take daily actions to prioritize their mental health through joy and mindfulness. She is creator of the My Time to Thrive card deck. Wow. An interactive tool for stress reduction and self-care. I did not know that. Okay. Dr. Charmaine consults with leaders to transform workplace cultures into psychologically safe environments. She's been featured in a lot of national media. We'll give you a few uh, um, of those: New York Times, NPR, PBS, Oprah Daily, Essence, Black Enterprise, Boston Globe. So people have heard of her, and we're glad to have her with us today. Super excited. In 2021, she was awarded the American Psychological Association Citizen Psychologist Award, and that was beneath the leadership of Dr. Jessica Henderson Daniel, a beloved mentor of mine. So I'm really excited to see you here. Dr. Paris Jean, or Jean, Paris, you have to tell me how you pronounce. Um,
Jean is fine.
Dean, okay,
Yeah.
is an assistant professor at Towson University in Maryland, right outside of DC, whose work focuses on culturally mindful interventions to support survivors of trauma. She received her PhD in counseling psychology from the University of Florida. She co-leads Regal Collective, which is an interdisciplinary research lab focused on Black wellness. She currently teaches psychology of the Black experience, applied theories of counseling, and introduction to research methods. Dr. Jean has expertise related in racial trauma, and in 2020, she co-founded Academics for Black Survival and Wellness. I remember that. That's how I came to know you. I really respect your work. It's a social justice initiative that provides anti-racism trainings and Black wellness experiences. This was particularly important through the time of the pandemic. If y'all will remember, many academics were experiencing extensive burnout. And so Dr. Jean and her colleagues put together a very beautiful program for us. So thank you. Um, she has a new book coming out, Strategically Navigating Anti-Black Racism in Professional Spaces, a practical guide for Black people responding to racism in the workplace. Again, someone who may know a thing or two about what we want to talk about today. And finally, Dr. Grace Kam, dear friend and colleague, known for years, is a clinical associate professor and chair of the Counseling Psychology and Applied Human Development Department at Boston University, Wheelock College of Education and Human Development. Dr. Kim was trained in clinical psychology and researches social justice, education, and Asian American psychology. recent special issue out that you all may want to check in. It's wonderfully done. She explores how to teach diversity and social justice effectively and how to train future professionals to be more culturally humble and responsive. She also focuses on resilience and mental health of Asian Americans, centering their struggles for liberation, social agency, and solidarity with other marginalized groups. She's the co-author of two books. One is Unraveling Assumptions, a primer for understanding oppression and privilege, and Teaching Diversity Relationally, Engaging Emotions and Embracing Possibilities, which is a one book that I actually use very much so in my work with my colleagues here at Fielding. She holds a fellow status in the American Psychological Association in both divisions 35 and 45 and the Asian American Psychological Association. She is the recipient of 2023 Boston University Provost Scholar Teacher of the Year Award. Wow, congratulations. I didn't know that. And she is the next president of the Society for the Psychology of Women, which is my home division within APA. So very, very glad to have Grace's leadership in that space. So just wanting to give all of you an opportunity to connect with and think about with us together and with this esteemed group of colleagues. Thank you all for saying yes and being here, creating an opportunity for continuing education credits or units for some of our colleagues as well. And I want to just pop into this conversation. We know that we are overworked and not doing so well in society right now. We know that. And we know that the boundaries around our workplace and our identities has really gotten a bit blurred. And so it's really important and special to see the work that you all are doing to help outline some boundaries and some clarity there. What do you wish the public understood about the role of the field of psychology to support a general sense of wellness and well-being as it relates to our work? That's my first question. And I want to start. You'll notice that we have a pretty large panel, and it is heavy with our early career colleagues. And I really want to hear from them first because it's a space where we know that managing and maintaining and balancing wellness and work can be a little bit of a challenge if we're honest. I'll speak for myself. I remember. Um, Paris, would you like to get us started? What do you wish the
Or
public understood?
Yeah, I mean, I think that in some ways it's been great that people are talking more about mental health. And I think with the pandemic, especially, people started to question their relationship with work. Many people had opportunities to telework and now kind of transitioning back. But I really would like the public to know that kind of psychology is a little bit more than like just, bubble baths and self-care words that people often throw around.
Yeah.
Sometimes it involves a lot of kind of deep work that can be uncomfortable at times. It can challenge you at times. And so I think that it's been great that mental health and self-care is getting a really good, I guess, PR run now. But also I think there's a need for kind of recognition of like, there are kind of more deep aspects of it that people also can benefit from when they explore their mental health.
I'd love to hear from Dr. Bragg or Dr. Caro Pinheiro. It's in terms of just thinking about what you wish the public knew and understood. And I think especially from your perspective as an early career psychologist, it's a pivotal moment.
No, I think something else that I think is so critical to emphasize is how psychologists continue to be like overlooked about the different abilities and the different ways that we really have so many strengths when it comes to interdisciplinary work. And the different settings where I have been trained as a graduate student and in different ways that I have been able to collaborate now as an early career professional, I think about just the potential that we have when it comes to like prevention and health promotion, for example, right? When we really bring in this lens of public health as well, we are not necessarily as well respected with the lengths that we can really bring. And just like Dr. Paris was talking about earlier, there's so much potential, but we're not taking seriously. And that is an aspect that I think when we really have this shift in the public lens, that is when real change can happen. And the second part that I really want to add here is really focusing on well-being rather than just treating illness. I think it's another aspect that I think is super critical. And that is such a big emphasis in counseling psychology, especially, right? And the subspecialty that we have with positive psychology, which I think is not necessarily really gaining as much traction yet.
And so when you think about not being taken seriously, it sounds like in the interdisciplinary space, psychologists not so. Do you think in some ways perhaps that your early career status also plays into that?
Absolutely. Whether as early career, but also just thinking about our stimulus value, right? The identities that we carry, and just really thinking about the intersection of, our individual identities and the systems at play. All those factors just really contribute to our own wellness, but also just the many ways that we're able to provide care, the quality of our work, and everything else that comes in between.
Certainly being overlooked, no matter your status, creates a sense of unsafety, or a sense of not being as valued. And so we have different reactions or responses to that. Some might lead to more work or trying to do more output to prove things to others, which therefore can create the stress and the burnout. Dr. Bragg, would you like to add your voice to this space?
Oh, would I? I will, this is a soapbox I have ad nauseum, but I will try to make this as concise as possible and keep my voice down while I do it. So the first thing that I would wish that people understood about those that choose to work within the discipline of psychology is that on one hand, it is that we provide life and death services. This is not Instagram reposting affirmations and talking about how you are a person of wellness because you eat tofu and you drink alkaline water. Great. But that has nothing to do with what fundamentally we as clinicians and practitioners, scholars, endeavor to do when we chose to go into this discipline. The other thing that usually gets me loud and riled up that I like to talk about a lot is that a lot of people I don't think realize is that psychology is very much a healing, affirming discipline that is integrated into a burning house. What I mean by that is that we are constantly trying to calibrate the wellness of others, but while we are absorbing their traumas, their stress, to further help them in systems that are causing the harm, the trauma, the stress, not only for the people that we help, but also for ourselves. And I think it creates a bifurcated system of burnout. One, in the work that we do for others, but then also too in what we want to do for ourselves. I think the phrase I always hear lately is, I'm in my soft life era, or I've given up the hyper independence, and I absolutely am here for that. And I really want those people. Now, if I'm going to see anybody on social media, I want to see those people posting how they're doing it, because I'm still trying to figure that out. And I have, just like all of you, many years of study of human behavior. And if y'all have figured it out, I need your Instagram handles immediately. But yes, those would be the two things that I think that are often overlooked. And this is not even accounting for our own identities in training to develop our skills, in practice, the environments that we are exposed to outside of our training, where our training is at. These are all things that also augment that, not only, again, for the communities that we serve, but also for ourselves. I'll leave it at that.
Dr. Jackman, I just saw you nodding pretty profusely. And, I think that one of the things that Dr. Bragg is getting at is this sort of self-care, and what we mean by that, and true wellness, authentic and genuine wellness, transformative wellness, if you will. what would you say, or how would you how do you differentiate between those ideals, right? Between self-care, as we see sometimes in the social media influencer space, that seems pretty aspirational, versus
Mhm.
perhaps what's likely to lead to human, I would say, just what's grounded in the human experience and what is healing for us.
Yes. Um, so I would want, can I jump really quick to what Dr. Bragg and some of the others were saying,
Yes,
just really
yes,
quickly.
yes,
I just wanted
absolutely.
to elevate this idea that I think the other piece that we're seeing
Mhm.
in terms of your question about what does the public need to know about psychology is that historically psychology has not really thought about the public in that way. And I
Mm,
think as we're having new voices
mhm,
and voices that are particularly speaking into our communities, diverse communities. And I think there are voices that are trying to think about what does psychology look like as an inclusive field. And
mhm.
I think that's why we're seeing more messaging and more conversations like this about the healer
Yeah.
in these, and what does well-being truly look like. So I
Mhm.
think I wanted to just
Yes.
raise that we're also evolving as a field and recognizing that we need to interact with
Mhm,
the public in a different way than just those one-on-one sessions.
mhm.
So I just wanted to lift that up. But yes, I agree with Dr. Bragg. We do life-saving work. And I think the issue is people never know because we prevent really bad stuff from happening. This is something we often said in my school.
Mhm,
But I think when I think about what we see in terms of social media, in terms of what is self-care, what is soul care,
mhm.
I really have had a reaction around that. And I think there's value. I think we're collectively saying we need to take better care of ourselves.
Mhm.
And this, I see this continuum as this unhealthy to healthy. So
Mhm.
there's the pieces around checking out, like when you go on your social media plunge or your Netflix plunge where you're like, I'm not dealing, right? And so that's my self-care.
Yeah.
There's definitely a place for that, but you can't rely on that,
Mhm.
right? And then there's the pampering, as I call the nails and the getting your hair done, getting lined up. Those are great. But
Mhm.
what is really important is that inner care, right? What are we doing then that actually takes care of ourselves on a day-to-day basis? I
Mhm.
talk about how do we take care of ourselves in the gaps, in those moments between meetings,
Mhm.
from work to home, right? What are we doing to intentionally
Mhm.
kind of turn that lens inward,
Mhm.
to think about what do I need right now? What does my body need? What does my mind need? And I think those are the pieces. And then I extend it also to community care because it is not just about self,
Yeah.
right? Like we exist in community
Mhm.
and we heal in community.
Mhm.
So thinking about that continuum
Mhm.
of that soul care, that inner care, and that community care is where we want to get people. When I
Mhm.
think about well-being, I think about it through that lens.
I think that is so important. I feel like we have such really great examples, both with academics for Black Lives, and also the grad student wish list. Like, these are some of those community focused, community care, mutual aid spaces that, interestingly enough, right, I believe both of our colleagues, when you developed, were you students, Ailey and Paris, when you developed those initiatives? I think it was really coming out. Can you talk a little bit about what was the context in which that was coming out of your experience? You're being both very polite now.
I can go. So I was in grad school, and obviously we know with 2020, there was a lot going on, but at least in my grad school context, it didn't always feel like people were saying what was going on.
Mhm.
So we obviously had COVID going on, but then also this was something that had been continued, but continued murders of Black people, whether it was at the hands of police or white supremacists.
Mhm.
And because of COVID and the social isolation, many people were experiencing, people kind of outside of the Black community or who weren't already tuned into that, were now having to look at it because they were consuming a lot more media.
Mhm.
And so Academics for Black Survival and Wellness really kind of came out of that frustration that academia was kind of just still rolling,
Yeah.
while all of the Black folks were not just having to still show up in our like academic spaces, but many of us, we know we go into clinical work or counseling. Typically, we're the listening ear kind of outside of our professional space too, whether it's for our family, our communities. And so we're holding the weight of that, experiencing our own racial trauma, and then showing up in these academic spaces that claim to care about social justice or claim to care about these things. And either people are not saying anything at all, or they're tiptoeing around it. And so there was just kind of a lot of frustration about that and that expectation that we were supposed to keep grinding through these very traumatic events. And so it came about like I was venting to my now husband over a donut about like how I like, you know, all of this stuff is going on. I'm still getting emails of people asking me to do this and do that. And having professors be like, well, I don't know what's going on, but you know, Paris, can you tell us what's going on with Black Lives Matter? No. And so having those types of interactions and just being like, I wish that non-Black people could actually just stop for a moment and actually take the time to educate themselves and do the work that they claim that they care about, and leave Black people alone so that we can kind of heal and have some time for ourselves. And so I've really been blessed to have an amazing mentor in Dr. Della Mosley. And so when I came to her with that idea, she was already having some conversations with other folks in our lab. And so she was like, yeah, let's do it. And that's how kind of Academics for Black Survival and Wellness came about. And it obviously, I thought it was just going to be like a department training. It got pretty big.
It did.
And that summer we had like over like 15,000 people participate in the initiative, which I could not have even imagined. And so I think that really speaks to when we're thinking about workplace culture and respecting like early career professionals, like Dr. Della was an early career professional at that time, and she, you know, obviously has things that she had to do in terms of research expectations and everything, but she still valued what her students were saying and making sure that we could like actualize those things. And so that has had a significant impact on me now as I'm in the early career space working with students, because she was really valuing those voices. So, but yeah, that's kind of how it came about.
Over a donut. Okay.
Yeah. I guess the key is to get me to rant with food and things happen.
Eileen, did you want to add in terms of what inspired the psych grad wish list?
Yes, I think for me, okay, so where do I begin? So I wasn't, it was the spring semester of my internship year, when I was in El Paso, Texas. That's where I was residing at the time. And I was just going through some, you know, very difficult times at my internship site. There was definitely some experiences of discrimination that was enduring, unfortunately, at the time. And that was, you know, terribly impacting my mental health. And, you know, the ways that I have typically dealt with that has been a double-edged sword. It was by doing more. It has been the way that I have historically dealt with things like that. But looking back, I don't regret doing that, because what I did was lean in community. And what essentially kind of like happened is that I was scrolling through Twitter. And I saw that there were medical students that had a similar movement. So I definitely want to give credit to there were a couple of medical students that had a similar movement kind of going for them, because they are also, you know, they also match, they go through the matching process, and they also have to move across the country to start their residencies. And I asked myself, you know, there really isn't anything like this for psychology students. And we also have to go through a similar process. And we all know how expensive it is for us. And I think for me, I was looking for something that was going to give me hope at the time. Bottom line, that is what was going on.
So you created it for you and for others.
Yes. And I talked about it with a couple colleagues, because I just wanted to make sure, there was still this aspect of self-doubt, whether it was going to be successful or not. Because all of a sudden, when you create something and you start with your own network, not knowing if people are going to trust the process, because all of a sudden you're just asking people to sign up for something when you don't know what it is and it has no traction, and you're just hoping that your own like networks are going to, spread the good word and it's going to take off from there and whatnot. And then hoping that then people that know you, right, the networks that you have built and the community that know you are going to donate and go from there. Now it's year 4, and the first year there were about 30 to 50 students that signed up, and this year it's been about 125.
Okay.
And one of the visions that I have for this is to eventually turn it into a nonprofit to actually help trainees of color also get supports for the APPP or just any other ways to essentially facilitate from the undergraduate training to graduate school access, to get them through internship, to licensure, through essentially all the different stages. And I know that internship is just one step, but any type of financial assistance, we know that it goes a long way, especially with everything going on economically. And I know that that is one way towards kind of the arch towards justice. And because one of the things that I have definitely learned through my mentors and different leaders that I look up to is to lift as we climb. And even during times that were really difficult for me, that was the way those were the things that were fulfilling to me. So that is how Psych Wish List came about.
I really appreciate that, it's alchemy in a way, right? You take something that's difficult and you turn it into something very beautiful that really can support and help others, similar to, Paris, is having a moment of like, oh my goodness, if one more person asked me one more thing and to carry something in addition to all the things that I'm carrying, and then realizing other people may feel that way too. Grace, I know we haven't heard from you yet, and that is my deepest regret. So we're about to pull you in. I'm thinking about our field, psychology. I'm thinking about our field and some of the contradictions, if we're honest, with ourselves. So our colleagues have already started to highlight some of this, but this idea particularly to train folks toward wellness and to support other individuals toward mental health and wellness and their own thriving. Meanwhile, our structures and our systems don't always feed into that. Most recently, our Council of Representatives and the America for APA approved guidelines for the respectful and ethical treatment of graduate students. And I always think about why that was necessary. I know why it was necessary, but it says a lot about our field. And you, Grace, have engaged in your work and your writing, and many of you on this call have, so be prepared to fill into the conversation. Your work has been addressing career and workplace dynamics, particularly in higher ed and the ed space. Can you share how you are integrating psychological science through your own research or that of others to advance these practices, evidence-based practices, for the public good as it relates to wellness at work? What have you been learning? What have you been writing about? And how has our psychological science supported that for you in getting those messages out to a wider group of people?
Sure. Before I talk about anything, I just want to say it's so amazing to hear the origin stories behind these really amazing things that you're doing. I attended the things that you have talked about, and Academics for Black Lives, and I just kind of wonder, like, wow, how are you doing these amazing things? And it's so nice to hear like what propelled you to do that. I'm so glad that you have done that, because it took some bravery and sort of strength to make it happen, from nothing. So I really appreciate that. Yeah, so I think, one thing that I keep thinking about this sort of pressure. It's almost like a pressure to self-care. And even, you know, as psychologists, we're told that all the time. You should take it, you should leave your work at work and try not to think about all these things and, you know, things like that. And yet people are working nonstop
Yes.
and right, and we're burning out and all these things. And I think one of the major issue is that that we're asked to solve systemic systems level problems at the individual level, right? So all these like bubble baths and, you know, pedicures and those kind of things are not going to solve issues around, you know, lack of equity and discrimination and all those things. And yet we are, you know, the culture that we live in is pulling us so much into that kind of things to really not look at the bigger issue. I think that's sort of what I think, right? So, so for me, it has been a lot about just really clarifying about my own values and sort of what the boundaries are. And so one study that my colleague Yuki Okubo, who's at Salisbury University, and my students have been looking at right now is listening from Asian American women faculty in social sciences and how they're navigating being hyper visible and completely invisible, that kind of spectrum, right? And some people have said things like, I work harder, you know, which is, I think, what a lot of people are doing. But I think some other people have been saying things like, you know, I'm very strategic about what I choose in terms of what kind of committees that I want to serve or what I say no to. And being very clear about what kind of leadership that I want to do versus what things that I do not want to do, right? And then I think some people are saying things like, you know, I am just only going to do my part about these areas, these particular areas, whatever that is, and not do these other things. And I'm also willing to leave academia if it doesn't, you know, suit me. So I think those things are really sort of speaking to this power of refusal, as you know, what you have taught us, Wendy, right? That we do not necessarily have to, you know, acquiesce to the cultural pressures that's always sort of, you know, pressing down on us, I think. So I think that's something in my role as a department chair, I think community comes as a first thing that I am always highlighting. So we are starting each year with a community gathering and with everyone in the department invited, and we're really spending, you know, half the day really sort of, you know, getting to know each other and really humanizing our experiences, because I don't think we can work well and thrive when we are constantly feeling like we're, you know, under a scarcity mindset and everyone has to compete for resources or, you know, recognition or things like that. So I think those are some of the research and sort of practice areas that are coming together for me in my work.
Dr. Jackman, I see you nodding profusely, and you in your bio talk about 2 bouts of burnout. Most people don't highlight that, and I don't know if one of those bouts was leaving an academic role, but I do know a number of colleagues who have made decisions to leave academia. Would you, I wonder about your own personal experience, but also how you're leveraging and grounding your practice, your guidance, and your work with your clients in our psychological science.
Absolutely. So yes, I talk about burnout because again, we don't talk, we're the professionals.
I know.
So we don't do burnout.
As we're burning out.
As we're burning out, right? And so I definitely felt 2 parts of my journey. I think there's a part that's me, that's a go-getter and very ambitious. And there's a part about the way I was raised within the field. I didn't learn coming up about, you know, boundaries and take care of yourself. I don't remember if it were, I don't remember it.
Okay.
And so, you know, I think we're definitely at a time where I was forced to look at what are you doing? How are you working? And I don't even think at the first one that I even named it, I just knew I was like, oh, this is too much. I can't. And I was just about to be a parent. And then the second one was I would say during COVID, I was starting my company. I was working full time, and my work has not been in academia, but it has been in K-12 schooling. And so where you're kind of always on, you kind of work those
Yes.
vacations, right?
Yes.
You're on,
Yes.
and break on,
Yes.
you know. And so
Yeah.
that rhythm was great, but I don't think I was actually taking care of myself during the breaks, right? I was doing more stuff. I was like, oh, this is time I can do more consulting now, right? And so it definitely came to a point where my blood pressure got to the point where I had to get on medication. And so those are kind of, I name it because those are the things that happen when we don't take care of ourselves. I'm a night owl, so I'll spend hours sleep, up at night, and then, not getting up. So all of these things that where I was prioritizing work over my well-being really had an impact. And so how I model and use our psychological science, a lot of my work now is actually with professionals, corporate, teachers, educators. And so I get to be in spaces where I can model, I can talk about my journey, but I can model also. Let's take a few minutes. So I start every workshop with a 5-minute, we do some breathing, we kind of tune in, do a body scan, and I have them set an intention. Then I ask at the end of that, and people often like, they can see the relief, right? You can see like, ooh, that felt good.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, how long was that? And I'm like, just about 5 minutes, right? And I'm like, I bet you say you don't have 5 minutes to take care of yourself. And I'm like, look how easy that is, right? And so I also try to shift the idea of self-care, soul care, whatever we're calling it, well-being. It sometimes, and myself, like, oh, I need to go get this long 1-hour walk in the forest, or I need to go hiking for this, or spend an hour in the gym, right? Or get this expensive, like we create all these barriers around what it should look like when it can just be 5 minutes of something that brings you joy. And that doesn't mean like that takes care of a mental health condition, but that is the daily maintenance you're doing to pour back into you.
Yes.
And so I try to model that message and give people, and actually give it to people in my workshop.
I love that so much. I do love to hike, though. I do like to get lost in the woods a little bit as well, but I get what
That's great.
if you can find the time, right? But you're also saying the woods are inside of you too, and you can access that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Dr. Jean, you have this book, Strategically Navigating Anti-Black Racism in Professional Spaces. How has psychological science informed the writing of this particular text? And what are some of the highlights or the things that you want people to know that you've put into this book?
Yeah, so this book is based off of my dissertation. And so it's interesting how this even came about. Essentially, I was at APA a couple years ago, and I was going around, like, I love books. So I was going around like buying different books. It was like a real great nerd kind of place for me to be at. And so I went to New Harbinger's like setup, and it just so happened they were like, it was like pitch the CEO when I was buying my books. And so I went over there and I was like, oh, maybe I'll get a paper for, like, I was going to give it to my advisor or something. And the CEO over there was like, hey, actually, like, what are you working on? And I was like, I'm a grad student. I just defended my dissertation. It's, like, nice to meet you. But I told him a little bit about my dissertation, which was developing a decision-making model for how Black grad students and early career professionals respond to racism in the workplace. And so he was very interested in that. He's like, I think that would be a really cool like workbook. And so after I kind of pushed through some of the imposter syndrome, I was like, well, maybe it would be better to take what I found with my dissertation and prioritize making a resource that would actually be useful to Black folks broadly. And of course, want to publish it in an academic journal and all of that. But the type of work that I like to do is practical work that's going to actually be helpful to the communities that I'm a part of and that I care about. And so being able to work on that for another couple years and it now being out has just been really great. But being able to use the research that I was doing, the model that was developed from my dissertation, and then turn it into a workbook where people can work through the model and kind of see how that would relate to their workplace. And one of the key things that really came out from that research was about being able, like the core of the model is knowledge of self, which if anyone's familiar with Black psychology, that's a big part of Black psychology. And so it was really cool to see that come out from the focus groups, and that because of capitalism and how we as Black people typically have to show up in our workplaces, we have to push a lot of ourselves away, right? We have to hide a little bit of ourselves to be able to navigate and function. And so what does it look like when we can still have that knowledge of ourselves and go back to our roots and build community and be able to kind of strategically navigate these spaces? And I think what was also interesting when I tell non-Black people about the book, they're really shocked that there's so much strategy that Black people have when we have to respond in these places, right? And so I think it also shows the amount of labor that we often have to go through. And so my hope with the book is that some of that labor will be kind of done for folks. Like, okay, here are some of the things that other Black folks have found to be helpful. Here are some things that you can start to consider even before you experience racism, so that when that racism might happen in your workplace, you feel prepared or you have the resources there. Because it can sometimes, if you're not really thinking about it, you're not prepared, you don't have the mentors, you don't have the community there with you, it can feel very isolating and it can have a significant impact on you. So that's kind of my hope with the book for Black folks in the workplace.
I really love that you have a theme running through your career, your early career so far, which is how to get it out to many more people to help many more others. I really am appreciating that. I think that that is definitely, as we're talking about the newness of our field and the ways in which our field is shifting and changing, as Dr. Jackman talked through. I think that that's one of the things that I'm seeing. You know, Dr. Bragg mentioned something earlier, and this isn't a question that I shared with you prior to getting on the call, so I'm hopeful that you will just kind of lean into this with me, which is, she said, if you figured out how to do it, if you figured out self-care, if you figured out how to take care of yourself, soul care, in the context of your work, please teach me, please tell me. I think that in the time that we have remaining, I would love for you all to, and I'll share too, to speak to one thing that you do for you, one thing that you have found that works. For me, it's hiking. I have to be honest. I love nature. I love to just spend time in nature and spend time watching it be consistently what it's been mostly, except for the impact of human beings on our climate. There's a caveat to that, but that always sort of brings me back and brings me down. And when I can't get out there, if it's raining or it's too hot, or I'm in California, so sometimes we have the fires and things like that, though it's not just a Californian thing anymore either. Meditation, that 5 minutes, Dr. Jackman, you are so right. Like, there is such a broad and robust inner universe if we access it. So those would be the things that I would say that I do. What do you all do? Dr. Taba Bryant, our former APA president, talks about coming home to yourself. I think that that's ultimately what I'm thinking through of what that might look like. How do you come home to yourself? We could popcorn it as your thoughts come to mind for you.
I travel.
You travel. Okay.
Yes. So when things get tough, I start fantasizing about being other places, and then I book a flight to get there.
Okay. That's very tangible. Okay. 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 And do you have a flight book now?
I sure do.
Okay, good. I'm just checking in on you. All right. How about others? What do you do? How do you get home back to yourself? What brings you joy?
I can go
I mean,
next.
oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, definitely travel has definitely been part of it. I see that as more of like a long term. When I know like there's going to be the end of a season that is going to like be very tiring, or I suspect that when I think about, or I joke sometimes with someone like my friends, is like I schedule when I know I'm going to be tired, so I know when to book those flights. And
Yeah.
I'm very grateful to have the access and privilege to do that. But it could be two very simple things for me. Laying down has magical powers.
It does.
And laying down and using a weighted blanket it's something that I think I have completely underestimated and what it does for me.
Okay.
But the other aspect has also been dancing. actually. And now that I am in a city that has different events, especially now we're transitioning from spring to summer, especially in the open areas, I do try to take advantage of that as much as I can. And it allows me to not only learn about more aspects of my own culture, but just to also explore different genres outside of my own. And that has been very enjoyable for me.
Dance is so magical. You're so right about that. I love dancing too. Charmaine, what were you going to say?
Oh yeah, I mean, I ditto to all the things, right? I definitely so a big thing I do similar to you is I do a travel in February. So I call it my February reset.
Okay.
And that's where I go away. Usually sometimes it's for a particular conference, but it's away not with my children or my husband. This is just for me.
Understood.
Understood, right? And then something that I try to practice every day is some type of movement. So if it's walking around the block, if I have time, I was working out very consistently, then I hurt my knee. So is that any type of movement? And then a daily quick thing, I try to think what are some things that are free that doesn't cost me money or a very low cost. I use scent. So I love using scent. So every night when I take my shower, I sprinkle lavender or eucalyptus in my shower. And now I started to create these little roller balls with a scent. So, and I started doing that in workshops, and people it's the simplest, people love it. Okay. So that's when I roll it here on inside my wrist, behind my ears. And so whenever I feel like, I just need to calm down, take a breath, I add my scent. And that is something that is in the moment. No one knows. And then, I always do breath. So
yes.
Breath is also very important.
I was just thinking how having that scent and smelling it after the fact is a reminder that you did something kind for you. It also feels very sweet as well.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. Grace and Paris, which of you would like to go last or go next, I should say? What do you do to take care of you to come home to yourself?
I'm having a hard time choosing one because there are just so many as I'm hearing things. I'm like, what are some things that I do? So I think one thing is that I think my wellness is really connected to people and like having a sense of connection. So there are a lot of text messages and like cute animal videos that are being sent back and forth between friends, so I think that's something that I do. Lately, I have to confess, K-dramas have been very important to me.
Yes, lean in.
And and I'm like, I'm also leaning into my own culture and also seeing how, things are changing. During the COVID days, like 2020, I developed this like walking kind of practice, partly because we had nothing to do, so just had to go for a walk.
And that was a safe activity back then, remember?
Yeah, it was, right? Yeah, so I'm walking everywhere. And the latest thing that I'm trying is acupuncture, which, I wasn't sure whether I was like, oh, is this going to be painful, like all these needles and, things like that. But I'm really realizing that it's really calming and relaxing for me and really helps with just a lot of stress relief and things like that. And the place where I go, they have a very communal model where it's a community acupuncture place. So there are usually multiple people in the room, but therefore the cost is lower and you can also access it more often than, being charged a lot in one. So I was just thinking like, I like that philosophy too. So I've been going pretty regularly with that.
There's a similar place where I am that I've gone to that with the group. Yeah, I love that.
Yes.
Paris, you are our last, but you are certainly not least.
I'm getting so many ideas.
Me too. My list is growing, which is a good thing.
So I think my self-care wellness practice is definitely a work in progress. I feel like part of like transitioning from grad school is like being like, oh, I have space and time for this. And so recently, like I've started doing like coloring, like I really like art. So I have a sloth coloring book that I like every once in a while pull out. Uh, and then I also like painting. So sometimes I'll paint like by myself, or like my husband and I'll go to like a paint and sip or do something like that, which is always really fun. And also like getting into reading fiction books. So for the longest time, I've only really read like nonfiction or like self-help books. That's just, I don't know, I was just always reading those types of books, but now I'm trying to get into more fiction books and just expand my imagination. So that's been really fun. So if anyone has any good fiction book recommendations, I'm always down to hear them.
I do. I'll share with you after. That's one of my guilty pleasures, or just one of my pleasures.
Oh,
I don't
yes.
feel really guilty about it at all. Yeah, fiction is wonderful. I really want to just say thank you so much for sharing and being, it's a personal side, but I feel like this is one of the things that we need to cultivate and uplift as psychologists, that we are first and foremost human beings. We are human beings, and we like we like to get into our K dramas. I love that so much for you, Jay. We love to watch and do the things that, like everybody else. We love to dance in the park. Eiley, I do too. We love to read. We love to wear nice scents. That's another thing I like too, Charmaine. One of the things that's felt nice is just to sort of see the things we have in common. And I think we have to remember that the humanizing part of our field and the work that we do, especially because we can be the filters for a lot of people's um, pain, truly, right? And we have pain too. So where do we release that, and where do we make space for ourselves with that? I feel like Dr. Charmaine, that is a big piece of what your work is with folks, is just to remind them of their humanity, and that they deserve to be more fully human, to take big human breaths, to take time for themselves. And also we need to do that for ourselves too. We are just 2 minutes shy of closing out. One of my care practices is to honor and acknowledge boundaries, so we don't go beyond the time that we have. I want to thank our participants who have borne witness to our conversation today. We will have ways of sharing this with our wider psychological community, as well, actually just our wider community, because I'm also a fan too, Paris, of making sure that our psychological knowledge and our science is made accessible to many more people, so that they don't have to go to therapy necessarily to get therapeutic experiences or to learn things that will help them. So this conversation will be a part of that too. I want to thank you all so much for your time and your energy and just your goodness. It shows in our world, it shows in our profession, and I'm very appreciative of you.